Hi, my name is Kelly Barner, and thank you for joining me for the Supplier Diversity Discussions video. Today, I actually have something really interesting for you. It is the audio from a recent LinkedIn Live audio event that marks National Anthem Day in the US, March 3rd. Now, Paul Lawrence is one of my fellow creators, and he and I brought together a couple of other speakers to talk about veteran entrepreneurship and veteran-owned businesses. So please listen in as Paul and I are joined by Chris Jolly and Scott Luton to talk through some research, some data, some realities about the American flag supply chain, and why each of us as consumers should potentially put our money where our mouth is when it comes to specific businesses. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's LinkedIn Live audio event. I can see that I have a couple of my speakers already in the waiting room. So if you just want to raise your hand and ask to be brought up onto the speaking floor, I can go ahead and click those through and bring you up with me. For anybody who is just joining us, that this is your first LinkedIn Live audio event, I'll go through some of the logistics in just a moment, but the good news about it is that it's actually very straightforward. Most of the functionality that you see here on screen is kind of what you get. There's myself. I'll be handling the moderating and making sure everyone has a chance to speak. You'll also see who else is listening in. You have the opportunity to click on and connect with any of the speakers or other events. You also have a reaction button down the bottom, and that's kind of cool because while there's no texting or chat functionality, that gives you a few emojis that you can use to engage with us as we speak. So I see there you are, Scott. If you want to raise your hand and ask to speak, I will bring you up onto the floor, and then we will get going today. All right, so as we figure out the logistics of that, my name is Kelly Barner, as I had said. Welcome to our National Anthem Day LinkedIn Live audio event. Our goal for today is to bring in people from some different perspectives and raise awareness for both veteran entrepreneurship and also veteran-owned businesses. So we thought March 3rd being National Anthem Day was good timing to do that. So with me up on stage right now, I have a couple of my fellow creators, and then Scott Luton is in the audience. He's going to be joining me momentarily as well. Paul Lawrence is a fellow creator. Paul, I can see you're off mute. Would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure, Kelly. Thanks a lot. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm a creator, and Kelly and I met through the program. I'm an Army veteran from a long time ago. I grew up in a military family. Most of my career was in the private sector, but from 2018 to early in 2021, I served as Undersecretary for Benefits at the Veterans Administration. So I really got a lot of knowledge of the benefits and how they work to help veterans after they leave the service to pursue their American dream. So when you see me on LinkedIn, I'm often writing about veterans issues and what it means to be a veteran entrepreneur. I'm always interested in their journey and stories.
Excellent, Paul. Thank you so much. And Chris is another fellow creator going through the program. Chris, do you want to say hi and introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Kelly, thank you so much for reaching out. We're also a member of the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program. I see Victoria Taylor down in the listening in right now. She's my advocate / phenomenal contact over there, and has been there with me throughout this. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be on here talking about this and bringing awareness for our veterans, the men and women who serve this country and do so much to protect everything we have here. Speaking about this, bringing awareness to this is just something that's the least that I can do. I mean, everybody in my family served up, until me. My father was in, my grandfathers were in service as well, and I just feel like they fought for me to have the freedom that I do today and to utilize my voice to help elevate others in this world. So
that's awesome, Chris. Thank you. And now we've got Scott up on the speaking floor with us as well. So Scott, I'm going to have you unmute yourself. And if you want to go ahead and provide a brief introduction to yourself, we will have met everybody that's coming to speak and we can get into the bulk of today's content.
Wonderful. Hey, good afternoon, Kelly and Chris and Paul. I love what you are doing here. I am a veteran of the United States Air Force, where I served as a data analyst. I'm not a combat veteran, but I was introduced to big data during my time back when that was in its earliest infancy, and where our services were trying to figure out how to use that, especially in the maintenance of our aircraft in the world's greatest Air Force that it's ever seen. Very proud of that. And I'm also a veteran entrepreneur. We've been entrepreneurs since 2013. Here lately, of course, we founded and serve as CEO of Supply Chain Now, where I get to collaborate with incredible people like Kelly and consume great content like Chris Jolly's putting out over the Freight Coach. So pleasure to be, really pleased to be here. One last point, Kelly, I really appreciate it. I've seen you in action for years now. We need veteran advocates that take action to support our veterans, regardless of where they are in their journey, whether you're just getting out or if you've been out for a few years or if you're been out 20 years. We need incredible veteran advocates that give of their time and resources, and I really appreciate what you do in that regard.
I mean, it's my honor, Scott, right? As Chris shared, so he and I are the two on here that are not veterans. We both have, though, a history of service in our family. And perhaps if they conquered anything in the process, it was our hearts with regard to our veterans. And of course, veteran spouses also become part of that conversation. So now that we have everybody up on stage, I'm going to give you a really quick rundown of the points that we're going to hit today. We actually have a few really interesting things that we're going to talk through. We're going to start by taking sort of a case example, again in honor of National Anthem Day, taking a look at some information around not just veteran entrepreneurship and manufacturing in the U.S., but some information specifically related to the manufacture and production of American flags. So that's where we're going to start. We're going to talk generally about veteran business ownership, partly in terms of the skills and capabilities that the military gives service members that also make them successful in business. But we ran a poll this past week just to sort of gauge the temperature from people on LinkedIn, how they feel about potentially paying more for something that they know came from what we would consider a diverse supply chain. And that includes businesses owned by minorities, women, veterans, disabled individuals, LGBTQ individuals, etc. So we'll share that information. And then finally, we'll talk about the why. Right? Anything important like this has a why behind it. We will talk about that. Since we've had a few more people join listening in, I'll do one more quick run through of the LinkedIn live audio event logistics. As you hear our speakers today, you see you have a react button down there. We've already got some love from Victoria, so thank you, Victoria. You can clap, you can love, you've got some different options, and we're going to be watching that to kind of gauge your perspective as we go through the conversation. So, Paul, let me then turn to you, because part of the idea for today's session came out of a conversation that you and I were having around U.S. manufactured flags. So I'm gonna pause my part of the talking and hand over to you to tell your story and what you learned through that process.
Sure. Yeah, it was back in June of last year. I was thinking about a LinkedIn post, and I was looking at my calendar, and June 14th, for those of you who don't remember this off the top of your head, is Flag Day. So I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I went back to my third grade self and tried to imagine what I remembered being taught in social studies about our flag, right? What the colors meant, and I thought that was good to reflect on that, the stars and how it all came to be. And so I said, on Flag Day, I'm going to make sure I put out our flag. And so I went to find our flag, and it was really kind of worn. And then I looked around my office and said, well, I don't even have like a flag in my office or anything. So I began to search around, and I said, gee, wouldn't it be great to be able to buy a flag that was actually made in America, or, made by a veteran-owned business? And so it really was harder than I thought. And so I ended my post with a question about, gee, if you know anybody who is a veteran business or the like and makes flags, I'd love to know about it. So I sent it out. The post did pretty well, got a lot of engagement, but one person sent me a thing in a comment with a picture, and they said, there's this really interesting veteran-owned business that makes American flags, and it's called Brave American. It's like braveamerican.com. She sent me the picture, and what was interesting about the picture was I imagined like a cloth flag, that you think about out front, but it was a wooden flag. It was a wooden base and a metal flag that you could actually hold up to the window, and the stars were cut out so you could see the stars through the sunlight. It was really, really interesting. So I contacted them. I bought one of the flags. They were reasonably priced, really solid. It's made in America, veteran business. So it really gave me a perspective on, flags ought to be made in America. You ought to be able to support a veteran business, get in there. It was somewhat hard, but not totally difficult. And I was glad to be able to do that. Let's see, the man who runs the company, Matt Smith, he's on LinkedIn, so I communicated with him, and it was great to be able to support a veteran, get a flag, and and appreciated even LinkedIn making it all possible.
And that sort of is the power of the interconnectivity, right? And so it's funny, and I have sort of a similar flag story that I'll share in a minute. But Chris, in the meantime, I actually want to share one of the reasons that we pulled you into this. Not only are you also in supply chain and logistics with Scott and I, but what actually caught my attention and made me think to pull you in was a post that you recently shared as sort of a behind the scenes, right? We're all in this situation of being on video in some type of impromptu home studio this day. And it was what you had behind you for your shot that you were enthusiastic about. So if I can toss to you and have you both talk about what it was you were sharing and why you were so enthusiastic about making that part of your online social presence, I think that will make very clear why we've looped you into this conversation.
Oh, definitely. And to Paul's point earlier, about buying an American flag made in America was a big thing for me. So that's what it was. It was the first thing. Like I've been in business for myself now for coming on 2 years, and I've been fortunate to be able to get out of my house and get an office and build out this studio and, start formulating all my dreams. And it just I knew that I needed to hang the American flag in my office because of what it represents as the ability to be an entrepreneur in this country and the sacrifices that so many people have laid down to preserve the American dream. And that's literally what I'm living right now, is the American dream, by doing all of what I'm able to accomplish through the sacrifices of others. And it's the least I can do is to fly the American flag in my office to show a little amount of respect to, because this is, in my opinion, this wouldn't be possible anywhere else in the world. And I truly believe that. I feel like it's the least that we can all do is to give back to our country, the greatest nation on earth, in my opinion.
And I wholeheartedly agree with you. Now, it's interesting that you talk about getting into an office. I predominantly spend time on camera because I get to be a member of the Supply Chain Now team. I mostly set up my backdrop. I'm a writer by trade, so I would be very happy never being on camera. But as part of my show, Dial P for Procurement on Supply Chain Now, I needed to come up with a backdrop. And I gave a great deal of thought to everything that I had behind me. I guess partially because my own OCD viewership, I spend as much time checking out the background of other people as I do listening to them talk. And I wanted to sort of provide that suggestion on my background. So I have behind me, it was not made by Brave American. I had not yet met Matt. Mine was made by Flags of Valor. And it's a wooden flag that kind of stands up on its own. So it's able to be in my bookshelf. It's a veteran-owned company. It was made by a veteran. And as a matter of fact, the back of it is signed by the individual that did the last step of the process. And that person is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. So not only is that business veteran-owned and it benefits veterans, it's predominantly a veteran-driven workforce. So a couple of interesting statistics that I had looked into. I was sort of wondering, if we think about the supply chain of flags, what are the rules about how all of this works? Now, I knew there were some requirements around flags being made in the U.S. I wasn't 100% sure what those rules were. So there is, fortunately, a Flag Manufacturers Association of America, and they track some really interesting information. So here, first of all, are the rules. U.S. law, and this is actually a relatively new law, U.S. law requires every American flag to be labeled with its country of origin. So if you have a flag, and I think this applies specifically to the cloth or textile flags that you would hang, it has to have a label on it that says where it was made. So it doesn't necessarily have to be made in the US, but it does have to be clear about where it was produced. Now, 94% of American flags are currently made in America, but there's a little wrinkle to that. In order to actually bear the Made in the USA label, those flags have to be made in the US from American-made textiles. So you can't bring in the raw materials from elsewhere and simply assemble them or package them in the US. We're actually looking multiple tiers deep into the supply chain. The fabrics themselves and the threads that go into the stitching on the stars if you have an embroidered flag, those all have to be made in the US. And so, Scott, this is where I would like to bring you in. Now, you talked a little bit about the fact that you are a veteran entrepreneur. You talked about the fact that, that's an important part of your background, and it's clearly something that we all support here. But we didn't get a chance to hear from a podcast that you launched called Veteran Voices. And through that podcast, you bring to life the stories of veterans specifically transitioning from military service into the private sector. And I wonder if you would just speak briefly both about the advantages that you think veterans bring to the workforce, whether it's at the ownership level or whether it's in the larger workforce, and why it's so important for those of us that didn't serve to hear their stories.
Those are some big questions, and I hope I do the answers justice in a little bit of time we have here. But it's been such a even coming from a military family, right, where my dad, my grandparents served in World War II. My dad served over 30 years between the Army and the National Guard, and then I served one stint in the Air Force. And so having already been privy to kind of the veteran experience, the VX, there's another X for everybody. Veteran Voices has been an eye-opener. It really has helped me to actively kind of attack my assumptions through my own experience of wearing the uniform. So I think we're about 60 episodes deep. We've interviewed a wide variety of folks. I think when I think of, why is that important, right? Why is it important to give a veteran, regardless of where they are in their journey, a platform and amplify their voice? Well, I think it provides, not only does it provide the individual and empower the individual with an opportunity to share their experience, to share what they've learned and share where they've struggled and share how they've overcome those struggles and share where they are now and where they're headed. But it allows, more importantly, veteran advocates, really the rest of the world, but certainly the rest of the American population, an opportunity to become more aware and better understand that VX, that veterans experience. And then secondly, it helps them actively attack those blind spots. And when I say blind spots, I think of, like, for me, military spouses. A lot of folks, including veterans, have no idea the unique challenges that military spouses have as they follow the family wherever, their military members stationed. Try to get a job when you change station, once every year or every 2 years, especially a job where you're fully employed. So military spouses have been an eye-opener. Veteran homelessness. And we sat down and interviewed a couple that had 3 daughters, and halfway through the pandemic, they found themselves living in their car. And it was a shock to the system. And fortunately, leaning on great nonprofits like Vets to Industry, where you can learn more at vets2industry.org, they were able to acquire the resources to get back into an apartment. And then finally, veteran advocates, giving them the opportunity as part of Veteran Voices or any programming to jump on and share, what's their why? What's their why in giving back or giving forward to the veteran population? What opportunities, avenues, gaps in the system, so to speak, do they see, and what have they been doing about it? And we can learn so much, and those are just three of the eureka moments I've had. we all stand to gain and learn so much. And then finally, Kelly, the why. And why is it important, and why should we be doing it? And I think it's something that Chris touched on. You and Chris maybe touched on the front end. I think, Paul, you may have alluded to it. But we do owe it. Whether you're a veteran or you're not a veteran, whether your family's ever been, ever served or hasn't served, it doesn't matter. We all benefit from hundreds of thousands of military members that not only have served, but in some cases, as we all know, have made the ultimate sacrifice for us to be able to live in a country where it is such a wonderful experience to be able to start a business and grow a business and enjoy the fruits of all of that. I mean, that wouldn't happen without the timeless sacrifice that our veterans and military members have made. So that's, we could talk about, I think, your two questions for hours on end, but that's tip of the iceberg for me.
No, I think so, Scott. And as a matter of fact, Paul, I am going to bring you in here because this was one of the very first things you and I talked about after meeting through the LinkedIn Creator Accelerator program. And we did talk about why. Do you mind sharing sort of your perspective on why perhaps, or what kind of a drive is associated with people who benefit from the service of military members and veterans, and what should drive some of those consumer choices?
Sure. I remember we were talking about supplier diversity, right? And so I was thinking about the reasons why big companies, let's say, would want to buy from, they tend to be smaller veteran-owned businesses, right? And if you didn't know, and Scott did a good job of talking about this too, right? Veterans come by virtue of their experience in the military with generally a lot of really good training and traits, I like to think, right? Leadership, dealing with ambiguity, teamwork. I mean, you could go on. You see this in college rankings, for example. The student veterans tend to outperform sort of the non-veterans because of all these different trainings, right? So when they form companies or work in companies, they tend to bring all that. And there's one thing that's hard to explain is like their mission focus, right? So assuming, they're pretty serious about their business, they'll do just about anything to complete the agreement they had as a supplier. So there's just sort of a, they'll do a good job, chances are, all things being equal. But the other thing, and again, Scott alluded to this, right, is like the really interesting thing about it is like when you're a veteran, is you've really already demonstrated the responsibilities of citizenship. As Scott says, going off and protecting our way of life. So now you come back and it's sort of like, my belief is, hey, you get some of the rights now, right? You've done the responsibility, the hard part, you get some of the rights, and it's like, hey, go out of your way to, frequent, patronize a veteran-owned business because of what they've done, right? And it's one of those things where you don't think about very often, though Scott described it, right? My father's buried in Arlington Cemetery, and he just passed of cancer, so he was not, a combat consequence. But you sit there and you look across rows and rows and waves of graves, and you realize all these people like made all the stuff we do possible. And so it's some sort of way of paying back, and understanding we appreciate that, right? As the military services, smaller and smaller percentage of our general population, it's one way of acknowledging, I know there was something special about what you did, and I'll vote with my dollars and let you know I appreciate that. So I think it's a combination of the two things. Chances are you're going to get a pretty good product and service, and then you're going to feel good about supporting it.
No, I think that's an excellent point. And one of the things that you mentioned, Paul, actually helps us transition to the next thing we wanted to talk about, which was sort of the temperature assessment I was able to take on LinkedIn in terms of whether there was an appetite to pay more for a product or service that comes from a supply chain that, we're talking about veterans today, but this is inclusive of minority-owned, woman-owned, disabled-owned, all of these different types of categorized businesses. What is the appetite to pay more? And I think the thing you pointed out that's so important is that oftentimes the businesses that pursue these types of certifications are also small. Now, they're small in some cases because large publicly owned corporations don't own themselves enough to be qualified for these certifications. But in other cases, they're small simply because the identity of the person who started the business is the one that has this as part of their mission. And that's a key factor in them pursuing the certification. So let me share where the results came in, and then I'll go around the circle, maybe starting with you, Paul, but then pulling in Chris and Scott as well. Here are the results. So I asked, as a consumer, how much more are you willing to pay for something if it comes from a diverse-owned company or supply chain? And here are the results from the largest response category to the smallest. So in first place, with 38%, we had simply the question, why should I pay more? So not quite half, but almost 40%, why should I pay more for this? In second place, very close second place, with 36%, we had a willingness to pay between 6 and 10% more for a product or service. In third place, distant third place actually, with 16%, we had people saying they would pay less than 5% more, so very close, sort of a rounding error. And then the last 10% offered up that they would be willing to pay somewhere between 11 and 20% more, knowing that the company was owned by someone in a diverse category or that the supply chain had made the conscious decision to be more diverse. So Paul, let me come to you first. What are your thoughts or reactions to those numbers?
I guess I'm not really surprised. Part of me was thinking more about what's going on during the pandemic, right? The restaurants in my neighborhood or the little stores that have been open in my neighborhood, I've been able to frequent when the pandemic's been going on, like not all of them were, So I think about my favorite restaurant, and I used to go there and I would tip like 20% because that would just seem like my wife was a former waitress, right? So she would egg me on. But during the pandemic, it was like the tips were much larger because I appreciated them being open, and I always felt like the money stayed in the community. And it was the same way I thought about it. Yeah, I'd pay 10% more if it was going to a veteran-owned business and the money stayed in that kind of ecosystem. I get the people as an economist who say, why should I pay more? But the reality of the situation is, and here, Kelly, I know I'm now about ready to wander into your expertise, right? The way the supply chain works is like you can ship everything offshore and get it done cheaper.
Yeah.
And the money doesn't stay in your community. So I get it. You'd like it to be perfect, but I'm willing to pay more to know that this supports our community, maybe some veterans and maybe people nearby, and that's okay. So I guess it tracks with my thinking, and I know you can only do so much with a survey.
Mm-hmm.
If they were on here, we could talk about some of the puts and takes, but I think it tracked with me, and I think that would be how I think about, going to the local businesses in my neighborhood.
Interesting. Now, Chris, what do you think? And I'll give you a quick rundown again because I know we're audio only. So 38%, why should I pay more? 36% between 6 and 10% more, 16% saying, less than 5%, and then 10% saying 11 to 20%. When you think about your decision-making process as a consumer, how does the identity of the business owner or the composition of the workforce or the mission of the company, even as a whole, influence your decision-making and spending willingness?
Prior to going into myself, I was in the 38% of why pay more. But now that I am a small business owner, I am very aware of where I spend my money because I do want to support local. I do want to support the local community of American-made products and everybody else. To me, it doesn't matter. Like as long as you're out there going for it, I want to support you because I want to see those dreams be lived out. Like again, I'm not here to knock on any large corporations. I know there's a lot of large corporations that do a lot of great things, and I understand, publicly traded companies and how all of that works. But I want to see, I am the underdog. All of us are the underdog. Like we're all coming up here trying to forge our ways, and I want to help support those people who literally have every dollar on the line. To Paul's point about during the pandemic and buying at local restaurants and everything else, and trying to support our community. That's what we need to focus in on, is supporting our communities more than anything. Because it's like you're sitting there saying, why should I 10% more? And that's such an arbitrary number. Okay, so you're not willing to pay $11 as opposed to $10? I don't think people actually put it into context how little extra it actually costs, to buy that product that was made local, made in America, and everything else. Because here's the thing, I think what we're seeing now from the current supply chain issues that have been plaguing us for a while is the cost of goods to make them in America are very comparative now to what they are to send them overseas and import them back in and everything else, especially because like the shelves are, they're bare, they're being held up in ports and everything else. And it's like, that's a great way to alleviate a lot of those scenarios, is manufacture them in America, make them in America, and then sell them here.
Absolutely. Well, and it's interesting too, because you talk about putting it into context with a dollar value. There is that concept of perceived value, because some of these things, especially the things that are more artisan, Paul and I talked about our flags that were definitely maybe not as commercial grade scale produced. There is a little bit more handicraft work to it, and there's an individual component. Some of that I imagine is priced in, and some of it is based on the fact that you can't necessarily get a comparable item somewhere else. Whereas if you were to look at a flag that's mass produced, that's for sale in a Lowe's or a Home Depot, I mean, you would like to think that something around an American flag, people wouldn't shy away from paying a couple more bucks to get an American flag, of all things, that helped employ as many Americans as possible. Scott, let me pull you in and get your perspective, and you sort of get the choice here, either about your perspective as a consumer, or knowing that you're also in supply chain, any perspective that you have around sort of that specific component to either driving up the cost of something that's made here locally, or sort of the challenges associated with how all of those material costs build up into a finished good. What are your thoughts about the consumer valuation of things made by, say, a veteran-owned business in this case?
So I'm going to bear with me as I talk out of both sides of my mouth as we address this question. I think, so on one hand, and Paul and Chris both put it very eloquent, both the need to give and support, but also on the consumer side, I want what I want at the price I want and when I want it, and we've seen that front and center, not just in supply chain but in business, over the last few years. And 38%, if I'm reading the poll findings correctly, 38%.
Yep.
Why should I pay more?
Yeah.
Right? Was that 38%? Right?
It was, yes.
So I can appreciate that. I can appreciate that 38% of the respondents chose that answer. I can appreciate the sentiment behind that answer. And, there may not be any good answer to that question in terms of their response, right? That's how we've essentially trained the consumer to ask that question, right? We've done it to ourselves. Now, setting all that aside, who I am as an entrepreneur, as a veteran, as a business leader, as how I vote and act with my wallet, is I believe in giving. I believe in supporting. I believe in giving folks a shot. I especially believe in investing, if I have the wherewithal, to give veterans a shot at helping their transition, helping them start their business. Paul, I love your mention of our wonderful people in the services industries, right? Our waiters and waitresses and bartenders. Man, I've been there. That's how I got through college. And it's a very similar and related calling, I believe, right? I think we're called to give forward and to give from what we have. And I believe when we talk about our veteran community, and we talk about our veteran entrepreneurs, and we talk about the non-entrepreneurs, folks that are just transitioning and they need help, and there's so many folks that need help. I hope everyone that's on this call, I hope their LinkedIn inboxes fill up like mine, because veterans that are transitioning need your LinkedIn connection. They need your willingness to acknowledge their service. They need your market intel. They need, goodness knows, they need your introductions. So I believe in giving, and I believe that's the right thing to do. And I believe that global supply chain, because of some of the reasons that Paul mentioned earlier, I think global supply chain in our ecosystem is in a unique position to really support and invest in our veteran community, especially with good jobs that don't underemploy our veterans. So it's really tough to separate, I find, at least when we talk about some of the things we're talking about here today. It's very tough for me to separate the emotional side and the and kind of the values-driven side,
Yes.
from just the straight and narrow business case side, because I've got a toe in each. But man, if you can give, you got to give, and you got to give regularly, as our dear friend Greg White says. And
Yes.
gosh, the veteran community, not only can they use it, but they deserve it.
Yeah, and I think that's, the nice thing. We talk about diversity, which in the context of my project is supplier diversity. But the amazing thing is we have even greater consumer diversity. And so if everyone picks a cause or two, and most of these are not mutually exclusive, right? You can shop local on the one hand to support small businesses, but when you're looking at maybe decisions with slightly less geographical constraints, pick a woman-owned business, pick a veteran-owned business, whatever your particular cause happens to be, chances are there's a business of that type out there owned by that type of an individual. And so hopefully, as long as we keep raising that awareness and celebrating the differences, right, it creates a huge opportunity for each of us to have an impact. I mean, most of us here are either independents or are small businesses. And so we certainly feel the potential benefit of being supported by somebody that identifies with a cause or a mission. But we also sort of share this wanting to do good with our wallets and with the money that we spend. So Paul, you and I had brainstormed out this conversation, and I think we're probably coming close to a wrap. But I want to come over to you maybe for a final thought, either your perspective on something that we discussed today, a new idea that comes out of the exchange of ideas, or even potentially something that you're going to take from today and put into your Creator Accelerator project going forward.
Yeah, well, the one thing, we kind of bounced around and touched on this a little bit, but as I was thinking about both Scott and Chris describing the supply chain, I was reflecting on the irony of the picture you took in front of the Sherman tank to sort of announce this event, right? Because it led me to do more research on the tank, just kind of how it was made and whatever. And the tank was made in America, but it was the most sought after item during the Lend-Lease program. Remember, we couldn't quite go to war, but we could give all our armaments to our allies. So, the British wanted it, the Russians, who were then on our side, wanted it, Chinese who were fighting the Japanese wanted it. So it was really an interesting example of, product made in America that everybody wanted. So it's kind of an extreme example, but it does kind of give you a benchmark of, what is possible. It doesn't have to be what we sometimes wonder about now. So it really kind of put all of them together, right? And of course, it's even more interesting to think about is probably those tanks were made by women because the men were off fighting in the war or whatever. So it was really kind of an interesting post for a lot of different reasons in terms of reflecting on, I guess, just a benchmark of what used to be and what could still be possible.
Absolutely. And what a whole lot of people and industries and companies can do when they align their minds and their resources and their talent to achieving a very specific goal. So I want to thank all four of my speakers. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chris, for being here with me live today. Thank you to everybody that's listened in to all or part of this conversation. I definitely encourage you, as I shared, whether your interest is supply chain, logistics, veterans, or simply the Creator program, please do reach out, follow us. Let us know what you think. Comment in response. Yes, please go check out my video of the tank. If you have an opportunity to go see a Sherman tank, please go see a Sherman tank. But beyond that, I will leave it with this note of wishing you a very happy National Anthem Day and advocating that you go spend a few dollars with a local business or cause that means something to you. Thank you so much for joining us today, everyone.